Hi there. In this After Effects tutorial, we'll learn how to make a motion graphics animation like this. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I always do is import the files that I'm going to use in this tutorial. First, I'm going to bring in these two, and I'm going to save them into a folder that's going to be called Assets. I'm going to go back to File, Import, and now I'm going to bring in all these typical After Effects icons. I'm also going to save them into a folder called Icons. Again, File, Import. And now I'm going to bring in the sound effects and music that I'm going to use. This folder is going to be called Sound Effects. I'm going to create another folder for the compositions. And over it, I'm going to create the first one, which is going to be called Timeline Animation. It will be 1080 by 1920 pixels, vertical format, at 30 frames per second, and 15 seconds will be enough. By the way, if you like documentary-style editing, my course is now available. But it's not just a course in which I show you how to animate a sequence in After Effects and that's it, but I show you the entire procedure that I followed to create this animation. From the initial idea to the final render, going through each and every phase of the creative process. I'll leave the link in the description in case you want to take a look. Now, inside the Assets folder, from this JPG called Timeline, I'm going to create a new composition. The generated composition, I'm going to save it in its folder. This is an After Effects timeline. Basically, what I've done is I've taken screenshots, and then in Photoshop, I've stitched them all together. So this image is 12,000 pixels wide by 1,000 pixels high. With a right click, I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and I'm going to put the levels effect on it. I'm going to use this effect to give it a bit of contrast. I move this toggle a bit to the right, and this one to the left. That's enough. Notice, with effect and without effect. Back to the main composition, and here I'm going to bring in the timeline. Before converting it to 3D, I want to align it to the left side of the artboard. I click on this icon. If the alignment options don't appear, go to Window, Align. There it is. Now I can convert it to 3D. With right-click, I'm going to create a 35mm single-node camera. Again, right-click. New Null Object. We convert it to 3D as well, and the camera is inserted into it. Before animating the null, let's do a little camera movement. Here, at the beginning of the timeline, I drop down the Transform options and mark a keyframe in Position and another in Orientation. I activate two views to see it better. I have this viewer set to left view. Sometimes I've been asked why, when I activate two views, the left viewer doesn't show the camera structure. If I select it, yes, but if it is not selected, no. This can be a nuisance, because if we animate it or move it, we won't know where it is. To activate the structure, go to these three little lines or to View, View Options. In this window that opens, right now, you will only see the camera structure when it is selected. But if you set it to On, you will always see it, even if it is not selected. We continue. At the beginning, I'm going to put a 15-degree orientation on the x-axis. I'm going to move to about 415 or so, and then I'm going to do the next move. Let's look at this viewer, where we'll see it in real time. 90 degrees in Z. In Y, also 90 degrees. On the x-axis, I set it back to 0. This way, we have this movement. Look at the camera there. Now, we have to adjust the position to find a composition we like. On the Z-axis, I'm going to move the camera down, and I'm going to set the Z value to negative 230. All these keyframes are smoothed with F9. Now these two, I'm going to shape the curve, and I'm going to give them an influence of between 70 and 75%. I leave these two as they are by default. We continue. I change this viewer to front view, and I duplicate the timeline composition with Ctrl+D and move it to the right. If we hold down the Control key, it will fit perfectly to the other composition. But what happens when they are so perfectly joined that later when we activate motion blur, we will probably see empty pixels at the join? To avoid this, I select this composition, and with the Shift key pressed, I move it a little to the left to overlap it slightly. I make another copy of this composition. As before, I move it to the right, leaving it superimposed over the previous one, to avoid the above-mentioned problem. Now we can animate the null. Select it, P key, drop down position, and mark a keyframe, and I'll put it at the beginning of the timeline. We move to the 10th second, more or less, and we increase the X value quite a lot until we reach the end of the composition. To round it off, I put a value of 35,000. I smooth these two keyframes with F9. I preview to see how the animation looks. Okay, this looks special. Now, to create the loop, we do the following. About here, at about the 7:10 second. In this part, I'm going to mark a keyframe in the position and orientation of the camera. And here at the end, I have to try to make the animation end the same way it started. So, we have to put the same position in this last timeline. Here in Z, I'm going to set it to 180. I'm going to set this value to 0. This 15 degrees of the orientation, I'm going to put it here too at the end. But instead of 15, I'm going to put negative 15. This position of negative 1050 in Z, I will copy it with Ctrl+C. And right at this point, with Ctrl+V, I'm going to paste it. I'm going to focus on the last keyframes in here. Zooming in, I'm going to move back one frame. With the N key, I'm going to cut right there. Let's see if the loop works. Okay, we still need to make some adjustments. On this last composition in the timeline, I'm going to right-click Transform and flip it vertically. Okay, now we're a little closer. I'm going to focus on the beginning of the timeline. And with Ctrl+R, I'm going to bring up the rulers. And I'm going to add one that will serve as a guide. More or less around there, where the pink layer ends. And here, at the end, look where it is. I'm going to move this value until that pink layer coincides with our guideline. We can also do this with the arrow keys. Okay, I think it's perfect there. Let's see if it works now. It looks great. I need to make some adjustments here on these keyframes. I'm going to smooth them again with F9. And here, in the graphics editor, I'm going to give the handles an influence of between 60 and 65%. To fill in these empty spaces here, we're going to apply the CC Repetail effect to this composition, and I'm going to expand the pixels to the left. A very low value here will be enough. Now, with Ctrl+C, we copy this effect, and here at the end, with Ctrl+V, we paste it to this composition. But instead of expanding to the left, we have to expand it to the right. Here I'm going to set it to 0, and here I'm going to set a value between 200, 220 or something like that. Looks perfect. Okay, let's continue. Now I'm going to add all the icons that were floating here, which are the typical ones we can see in the After Effects interface. I'm going to create a folder first, called Comms Icons. And above it, I'm going to create the first one called Icons. This one will be 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. I'm going to leave everything else as is. And within this composition, I'm going to add the first icon. For example, this one, which, as you can see, is in PNG format. Now, with a right click, I'm going to add an adjustment layer and a couple of effects. The first one, called Fill, is almost white. I'm also going to add the Deep Glow plugin. But if you don't have this plugin, you can add the Glow plugin that comes by default in After Effects. And by making a few adjustments, we can achieve almost the same result. We'll increase the radius and leave the intensity there, very low. That's in case you don't have the Deep Glow plugin. Well, I'm going to lower the exposure quite a bit here. I'm going to leave it very low at 0.2. Notice that it's almost the same result as with the default glow in After Effects. We go back to the main composition, and I'm going to add the icon I just created. I'm also going to change the color to differentiate them, and these three are the same. Okay, so I'm also going to make this composition 3D. Notice where it is at the beginning. Well, we need to make some adjustments. I'll press the R key, and here in Z, I'm going to set it to 90 degrees. Now in the Y rotation, I'm also going to set it to another 90 degrees. I'm going to activate two views to see it better, and I'm going to change this viewfinder to front view. Look there where we have the icon composition. Now, on the Z axis, I'm going to move it to the right. Look there. We're seeing it in real time. I'm going to position it more or less when the camera has finished rotating. I think it might be right there. So I select the composition and I'm going to leave it there. But so that it doesn't intersect with the timeline track, I'm going to move it up a little. Okay, that's great. Now, from this composition, I'm going to make some more copies. I duplicate them with Ctrl+D. And these copies, everyone can position them however they like. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate these 5 copies again with Ctrl+D, and I'm going to move them all back. More or less along that part. Again, I'm going to select them all with Ctrl+D and reposition them on the Z axis. Let's see how it looks. Well, as I said before, we're going to position them to our liking so that it doesn't look like a pattern that's always in the same position. Notice that it's always the same. Okay, so one by one, we're going to modify their position. I'm going to preview everything and see how the animation looks. Well, this looks great. Maybe I'll make some more adjustments here. For example, I'm going to move this one up a little bit. I'm going to duplicate this one again, Ctrl+D, and position it roughly in the center here. I'm also going to move it back on the Z axis. Okay, well, now I like it a lot more. To avoid seeing the same icon in all of them, we have to duplicate this composition in the project panel and then replace it one by one. So I'm going to see how many copies I ended up making. From number 3 to number 23, that's 21 copies in total. So we select this composition and we're going to duplicate it 20 more times. Now, with all the compositions selected, we're going to double-click and they'll all open in these tabs. And as I said before, now we have to replace all the icons. With this layer selected and holding the Alt key, we can replace the icons. Remember, select the layer, press the Alt key, and drop it here on top. See, it changes automatically. Okay, so we're going to do that with all the compositions. Select the layer, hold the Alt key, and drop it here on top. It's that easy. And if we want, we can close these compositions here so they don't all pile up. We're stuck on layer 9. Select the layer, hold down the Alt key, and replace. These last two here, I'll have to add duplicates because I don't have any more icons. So I'm going to replace it with this one. And in this last one, I'm going to leave the shy icon. In this eye icon composition, what I'm going to do is remove the fill effect so the pupil can be seen. Okay, now we can close all these compositions. We're left with just timeline animation. But we're not done yet. We've replaced the icons. Now we have to replace each composition. And we're going to do it the same way as before. Expand the folder and start with this one, for example. And with the Icons 2 composition, hold down the Alt key and replace. And now we're going to start here to see all the changes. I'm going to preview it again to see how it looks, with all the compositions already replaced. In this last one here, I'm going to change the icon and add the After Effects logo. Okay, look how cool it looks there. And in this one you see repeated, I'm going to replace the icon with this one called FX. And well, if you want, you can still add more icons. I think these are enough. But, as I said, this also depends on individual taste. Okay, let's continue. To keep the timeline a little cleaner and not have so many compositions here, I'm going to activate this icon. And by clicking here, we're going to hide all the compositions. Not delete them, just hide them. Notice, if we click again, they'll reappear. I'm now going to add the button we saw in the example, which I have rendered here. This one is called button. I'm going to put it on top here, and I'm also going to convert it to 3D. I'm going to place it here at the beginning of the timeline. I'm also going to change the color, for example, fuchsia. I press the P key and make sure the position is at 0. Now, on the y-axis, I'm going to move it up a little. I'm going to leave it roughly there. Now, to also create the loop with this animation of the arrow clicking, I'm going to put another guideline right there. And here, in this last keyframe, with Ctrl+D, I'm going to duplicate this layer. And with Ctrl+Home, we'll center it there in view. Now we have to rotate this layer 180 degrees. Right there. I press the P key, and here in Z, we'll leave the position at 0. Just like we did before, we'll move it up on the y-axis. And using our guideline, we're going to continue moving it here on the y-axis until we have it perfectly adjusted and the loop is perfect. Okay, I think this looks great. I'm going to set the exact value, 1940. There it is. From here on this last keyframe, I'm going to move one frame back. Press the N key and cut the workspace there. Now let's check if the loop is working properly or not. You can see there's a small jump, that the loop isn't working correctly. But we're going to fix that very easily. That's because the animation continues. Notice that it hasn't finished yet. It started more or less at this point. But since we cut the workspace there, this entire part of the animation isn't visible. So, let's go here, on the last keyframe, and on this layer, go to Edit, Split Layer, or Ctrl+Shift+D, and cut it there. But this time, instead of deleting this part, what we're going to do is put it here, at the beginning. And this one down here, I'm going to delete because it won't work. Okay, now that we're here at the beginning of the timeline, we select this part again, and with Control plus Home, we center it here in view. We rotate it 180 degrees again. I press the P key, we set the position to 0. And now, I'm going to move it up until it fits here along our guideline. We can also do this from here. Okay, with a value of -20, I think it's going to look perfect. I'm going to preview it again to see if it works correctly now. Okay, this looks spectacular. We still have a few things to do. Right-click, New Solid, and this will be used to set the background. The color doesn't matter because we're going to use the gradient ramp effect. And we're going to move this solid to the bottom. Now, here in the gradient, everyone can set the colors they like best. Another thing I'm going to do is, here in the timeline, I'm going to create a sort of vanishing point. And I'm going to do that with a shape layer. Right-click, New Shape Layer. And I'm going to call it End Circle. I'm going to add an ellipse and a fill. I'm going to set the color to white. And now I'm also going to convert this shape to 3D. Now using the S key, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Roughly the same dimensions as the timeline composition. I'm going to set the scale to 1000 because, as we saw at the beginning, this composition has a height of 1000 pixels. So, if we set the scale to 1000, it'll be the same size. Okay, now I want to position this circle right here at the end. But first, I'm going to rotate it in Y, and I'm going to set it to 90 degrees. By activating two views, we'll get a better look at what's happening. Look here at the beginning where we have the circle. Well, on the Z-axis, we're going to move it almost to the end. If we have a value of approximately 35,000 here, we're also going to set that value to the circle so that it's right there at the end. But so that it's not visible here in this part, I'm going to move it back a little bit further until it's not visible in the composition. More or less around there, a little bit more. Okay, around there. I'm going to activate this icon for the circle to keep only this layer, because I still have some adjustments to make. Here in Contents, in Ellipse Path, right-click, and I'm going to convert it to Bezier. Now, with the pen tool, I'm going to select this point here, and holding down Shift, I'm going to select this other one as well. Now, right-click on Mask and Shape Path, and where it says Closed, deactivate it. And now, holding down the Alt key, I'm going to sweep over this node, and I'm going to delete it as well. So I'm left with just this semicircle. Okay, now I'm going to put the deep glow effect back on this shape. I'm going to leave it as it is by default. Another thing I want to do is have this glow also affect the timeline composition. But if we move the circle forward a little, notice that even though it's on top of this composition, the glow isn't affected. So I'm going to show you a little trick. Right-click, create an adjustment layer. Now, we'll move this adjustment layer below the semicircle. Notice that this glow is also affecting the timeline, which is exactly what I want. This way, everything looks much more blended. We're almost at the end, although we still have a few things to do. In addition to the semicircle, I also want to project a ray of light upwards. So what I'm going to do is duplicate the circle. I'll press Ctrl+D, and I'm going to remove the glow from this one down here. I'm going to keep just this one to better see what we're doing. With the shape layer selected, I'm going to add the effect called Radial Fast Blur. Now, I'm going to set this value, the amount, to 100, and from Standard, I'm going to change it to Brightest. But look, if I move here on the timeline, notice that it makes a strange movement. What I want is for this ray of light to always project upwards. So, let's do the following. Here in Center, with the Alt key pressed, we're going to click on the clock, and here in the dialog box, I'm going to type 2comp, and inside the parentheses, value. If I select the effect, here we have this handle, and what I want is to place it right here, in the center of the semicircle, so that the ray projects upwards. But moving it directly from here is going to be a little tricky. If you want, you can try it out to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go here to center, and for this value, I'm going to set it to 0. And for this one here, it's the same, 0. So now we have the handle right here, in the center of the semicircle. And so that this ring of light projects upwards. I'm going to move this value. Look, that's where we also have the handle. I'm going to leave this value more or less around there, so it'll always be pointing upwards, which is exactly what I want. Okay, I think that's where it should work. Now, what I'm going to do for this layer is change the blending mode. If it doesn't appear, use the F4 key to expand it. And from normal, I'm going to change it to overlay. Look there, how cool it looks. And with that, we've finished the tutorial, and it's working perfectly. If you get stuck at any step or there's something you don't understand, write to me in the comments and we'll fix it. And if you like the tutorial, leave me a big like so I know. See you in the next video.